Hi, Eddie. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Good. Well, we always start with the same question at the start. So, as we always do, we talk about change. That's our main theme. So, what is the hardest change that has happened to you in your life?
Yeah, it's probably, it's a good question actually. Looking back at, sort of looking back, I think it's essentially, but yeah, essentially when I was probably in my early 20s, and at the time I was a chef, working in a sort of country pub out in Essex somewhere. And I'd done that really since school. So I sort of finished school when I was 16 and really into sort of cooking, and wanted to do that as a sort of lifestyle. And I sort of went into catering, sort of worked my way up, sort of got qualified while I was working. And then after a couple of years, realized that it's just really hard, like incredibly hard work. You're working sort of 14-hour, 15-hour days a lot of the time, or you split shifts. You can start at 6 in the morning, finish, at 2, and then come back at 6 till midnight, stuff like that. And I just wasn't really enjoying it very much. But when you're sort of in that position, you're sort of quite young as well, and you're earning enough money to sort of get by. It's sort of quite hard to. You're in a bit of a tunnel, and it's sort of quite hard to make that change and decide to do something else, especially when the social part of it was quite good. So it's very much a work hard, party hard sort of environment, which is always good fun. But I realised that it just wasn't sustainable long term. So you look at people in the industry, in their sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, and just see a lot of people that were, sort of good people, but they were just completely worn down. And you have to, when you're sort of looking at that, you're just thinking, oh my God, like, do I want to be 35, 40 and just be, exhausted all the time, and sort of doing the same thing I'm really doing now. It's something that I was really passionate about as well, and I really enjoyed doing. But I just had to make a decision to really move on. So, um, went back to college, and decided that I was just going to do something completely different, which it turned out never really happened. But at the time, it was a big change in my lifestyle. I got gone from this sort of working environment, lots of social good friends, working hard, to sort of going back into essentially I had to like learn how to go back to school, and then went to university, and sort of sort of restarted my career from there. So so when I was basically a full sort of career reset when I was 22.
I don't think people really who haven't worked in hospitality now, funnily enough, when I was younger, I always wanted to be a chef. I just wasn't a very good cook. Um, and I ended up in the hospitality industry myself, but I ended up front of house. Secretly jealous of all the chefs because they were always looking like they were well working the hardest, but also the most fun.
Yeah.
I think. Do you think looking back at that time as well, being working as hard as you were, like, it when you're working that much, do you think it's harder to sort of think about what you can do next and change, or is it the opposite where you just think I can't do this anymore, therefore I'm focused and I'm dedicated to finding something else to do?
I think it's probably different for everyone, but for me, I would say it was the former, because you're sort of in the moment and you're living it, and when you're in sort of that lifestyle, it's the same for lots of roles, and I think it depends on people's personality as well. You hear about sort of workaholics, and people, sort of people liking to be in control, but certainly when you're working that hard, you just feel like you're sort of stuck in the moment. It's it's something that's difficult to peel away from, I think. When you look at, especially when you're a bit younger, it's very difficult to look at what you're going to be doing in 15, 20 years time with any sort of clarity. And probably not so much when you're younger as well. Have conversations with people now. Your peers, sort of same age, people the same age as you. You might have grown up with them, or you might be sort of working with them now, and they want to do something completely different, but they're in that sort of mindset where they've got financial stability. You might have a mortgage or kids, and you don't want to move away from what you're doing because essentially it's paying the bills at the end of the month, and you have that feeling of, well, if I go into something different, am I going to have to take a huge pay cut? Am I going to have to start again? And I think that people probably don't put enough faith in themselves to sort of take that jump and really sort of really go with it. When I moved into student accommodation, so when I sort of finished uni, I sort of came out of uni in the recession after sort of 2008. So I carried on sort of working in hospitality for a while, went on to do a graduate scheme or program, and then I sort of did that for a few years, and then I moved into student accommodation, took the plunge really, and I sort of took quite a big pay cut to move into student accommodation. At the time, I just had my first son. He was probably only about 6 months old, so it's quite a precarious sort of financial time as well. But I think because I'd already moved from, what I already sort of had a big change in my life before, and I knew that I could do it. I was willing to take that risk, and I think people, sort of probably, especially when you get a bit older, people are really scared of taking risks and scared of change, and sometimes until you make that plunge, you don't know it's going to be all right, and sometimes it's probably not going to be all right, is it? But until you do it, you don't know.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think does that. So, well, a couple of questions really. Would you have approached any one of those changes any differently with the benefit of hindsight, obviously? And you sound like those changes have been really positive. Like, does that mean you now approach, have those experiences with positive changes led you to take more risks?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for moving, the first thing we spoke about, sort of moving out of hospitality or sort of back of house, certainly no, because I think that working in that environment for the length of time it did it sort of helped shape my values. Very much gives you the idea that if 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 you work hard, good things will come, and that your output is only probably going to be as good as your input a lot of the time. So that I really learned to work hard in that environment, and I think that's really sort of done me well in life because I sort of go into everything with the opinion that actually it's not going to be easy, and to get anything good out, you've got to put everything in. So no, I mean, I think when I moved into PBSA, I sort of wish I'd done it a bit earlier. Sort of one of those ones where you're working in an environment and you're getting calls from recruiters, or probably before LinkedIn was like massive, and you get sort of spammed quite a bit. Don't put that in, please, because no recruiters will ever talk to me again. But when you're getting approached by people, you're sort of a bit hesitant, aren't you, sometimes? And actually, I sort of wish I'd made that change a bit earlier. But I sort of like to, have that sort of philosophy where you think, well, things sort of happen for a reason, don't they? So yeah,
Yeah,
probably wouldn't, probably wouldn't approach it any different. So what was the second part of that question?
I guess do you now or feel more positive about change and therefore
Yeah,
willing to take more risks?
yeah, definitely. And sort of on a personal sort of level, I went through, my last role we went for a bit of a restructure as well. Big sort of change in my life then. And when you sort of make these changes, and especially when you're making the decisions yourself, I think it enshrines a bit of an attitude in you that you can come out of things positively. And as I said earlier, if you work hard and you really put things in, then you're in charge of your own destiny. Really, you have the power to come out of things in the way you want to. I think that one, like a lot of people don't have that confidence. Two, as I said, people aren't willing to take those risks, and it is a shame sometimes that you're not. And it's taken me a while to get to this point, definitely. I am where I am in my sort of career and life, and it's taken a while to get there. And if you asked me this 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had the same answer. But yeah, it's just about experience, isn't it? And I always say to people, when you talk to people who do want to change careers and they do want to do something different, just sort of say to people, just do it. What's the worst that can happen? The job market at the moment is in the UK certainly is really buoyant, and at worst you can go back to doing what you were doing before. So have a go.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's thinking about all is not lost. If you make a change that doesn't work out, you were still hopefully really good at what you were doing at the time before you made the change. I think it's really interesting talking to, having spent so many years in student accommodation myself, is one, everyone talks about how they sort of ended up in the career in student accommodation, but for everyone, it seems to be a real positive move. I know we're seeing some people now looking at roles in build to rent or sort of similarly skilled roles. But yeah, everybody that's joined the industry sort of, see from other careers, particularly, I know a lot of hospitality professionals have moved into student accommodation for very similar reasons to yourself around work life, and the amount of hours you're doing, I guess, which leads me nicely on to talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is student accommodation. So what do you see are the biggest changes happening in the sector at the moment?
There's a few. To start with, there's going to be a huge focus on building safety, fire, life safety this year. The Building Safety Act's gained royal assent at the moment. Just gained royal assent. And there's going to be, a lot stricter requirements on building owners to sort of understand what's in their buildings, and we're going to see much more strict assessment on the properties themselves, which is going to see investment that might have gone into sort of people purchasing new properties. That there's going to be a lot of focus going into spending the money reactively refitting buildings to make sure they're sort of up to standard. Away from that, the market has really changed in the last sort of couple of years since COVID. We know that there's sort of a huge growth in student numbers at the moment, that most markets are undersupplied. There's sort of more demand than supply, and even markets that traditionally were quite difficult to fill historically, sort of really up and coming again. I always sort of talk about Kingston as the example. You look at Kingston 5 years ago, nobody would want to buy property there. Most buildings were 60, 70% full. If anyone was telling you they're 100% full, they're probably lying to you. And now, the demand in the market, the university's really sort of picked up. We've got increase in international students. You've got increase in the number of 18-year-olds, which we know what the trends are going to be, and it's widely known in the industry. But because the market, there was that oversupply was there, people really haven't been building there. So now the demand is huge and the supply is, sort of not where it needs to be, which is it's the same for lots of markets. So at the same time, we've had a lot of decrease in HMOs. So places like Brighton, Kingston, not granting HMO licenses or extensions on HMOs, which again has meant more demand than supply. So I think we're going to see challenges with students being able to find accommodation basically in lots of markets. Universities are going to have to be cleverer speaking to PBSA providers about sort of what they want and when they want it. And not to say that they're not already, most of the universities that we deal with are, they're really switched on. They know what they need. But there are some that are probably a bit slower to react. And they're the ones that, there just needs to be a bit of a change in the way that the sort of the relationship between PBSA and universities interact. Because, as I said, there's lots of universities that are really switched on and have a really good relationship with PBSA, but there's lots where the relationship is quite ad hoc based on needs. And I think that that's going to be something that we're going to see changing significantly over the next couple of years. We're already starting to work, especially in London, with sort of smaller institutions that we probably wouldn't have worked with in the past. Again, because their sort of numbers are up. So yeah, it's a really interesting time actually. I think the other thing is that you sort of mentioned sort of co-living and BTR. I think that a lot of students, because they're not going to be able to find places in PBSA specifically, that there are students who will be looking in, that there are students that are going to be living in co-living buildings, just sort of anywhere to find somewhere to live. And so I think, as an industry, it's going to be something that we're going to have to react to. It's just going to be an interesting couple of years ahead.
Some really interesting things that you said there that I'll come back to. But one question that's sticking in my mind from listening to what you were saying around everything there is, what do you think is going to happen at clearing this year? We've seen demand seems to be front loading in the market. I see operators telling us all on LinkedIn and wherever how they're, some people 10% ahead year on year in terms of occupancy for September. So if doing a bit of crystal ball gazing, what do you think is going to happen with the market? And if you're a student that is possibly considering clearing, would you be worried about getting accommodation this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the universities guarantee first year places for students, and they'll guarantee first year places for students that come through clearing as part of their offer as well. I think a lot of the universities have been really smart. We've worked with a few universities that have sort of upped their numbers in anticipation for clearing. That they'll have clearing places specifically set aside with PBSA providers on options. But I do think that in a lot of markets, there's it's a supply and demand problem, isn't there? If there's not enough supply, then there are going to be students that are going to go into clearing and not have places. You look at Glasgow University last year, and you just need to look at the stories on the news where students went through clearing and they didn't get places. So it's not anything sort of confidential. It's sort of stuff you see on BBC News. You look at the rush for accommodation in places like Durham, where you've got sort of news stories of people queuing up on the streets, basically outside letting agents to get rooms, and rooms that, unless the universities have specifically earmarked nominations for those clearing students, then in markets like that, students aren't going to be able to get rooms at this late stage because all of the rooms in the markets we booked up already. So it's going to be a really challenging year. I think we'll see more movement in clearing because of that, and it'll be interesting to see how the universities work with clearing, whether they've sort of filled up their allocations earlier, and whether clearing is going to be a bigger thing for the universities as it has been traditionally this year.
So going back to something you said around, particularly the example you used around Kingston and how the demand in recent times has been low, and now it's buoyant. I'm assuming throughout your portfolio you work with different investors, not just one.
Yeah, absolutely.
How how are investors and providers such as yourself looking at that data, and is it available to sort of predict these future trends? Because it does feel like all of a sudden we lurch into a market, hopefully then doesn't become oversupplied like we've seen some markets lurch into,
yeah,
and then go into the next one. It used to be Exeter and Birmingham. Now, obviously, Kingston's upcoming. So, where's that data coming from, and are investors and providers looking at it, trying to predict the next, and how do they go about that, predicting the next buoyant market?
Yeah, so there is definitely data available. There's some really good reports from like Cushman's, Savills, who will look at sort of each individual market, what's in planning, sort of what's in the pipeline, and they'll have sort of off-market information as well. Who's got what land. So yeah, there's some really interesting numbers out there, as well as some of the agents as well now. Are doing their own sort of market analysis and predicting future numbers. So that there's lots of places we can get that information from. Obviously, market experience is really important as well. So, looking at your own experience in the market, where it's growing, where your year-on-year data is from the last few years, is important. And, as Fatty said on the last podcast, you have to have a strategy. And you have to set your strategy out in advance. We see, and for investors that have that strategy, we try and work with our clients to have sort of that sort of strategy in advance. And for those properties, you can really sort of stretch rents through the year. You do see it sort of poorly executed in some places, especially what we call dynamic pricing, but really like technically it's tiered pricing. I've seen examples recently of a property where they might have a gold studio that they've sort of been selling well, and there's been sort of big dynamic uplifts on it, but then it's now £15 or £20 a week more expensive than the platinum studio, because they're sort of reacting. They might be like, oh well, this studio is selling really well, we'll just have £10 a week on or £15 a week on, but there's no thought to the rest of the rooms in that building. And then you have sort of anomaly where you've got one room which might be 5 square meters smaller and have less sort of facilities in the room that might be then more expensive than a more premium product. So I think the way sort of investors are looking at things is sort of twofold really. It's everyone wants to be in that new market, don't they? That sort of the next booming market. And I think investors will pay for that information, and also sort of look in the market and see what there is as well, based on sort of how the universities are doing, where their numbers are. Sort of if you're sort of looking at those sort of signs of uptick, where the universities' research rankings are and things like that, definitely. It used to be that, I guess, in the olden days of PBSA, big sort of providers looked at sort of the traditional two university town, one good university and one probably sort of mid-tier university. You get clientele from both universities, and you'd build somewhere in the center of town or near the campus. But now there's PBSA in practically every market. You look at places like Norwich, that's an emerging market now. There's sort of quite a few buildings there, and there's more coming online this year, which sort of 4 or 5 years ago didn't really have any PBSA in at all. Canterbury, another sort of up and coming market there, and I think investors want to be sort of tuned into the next big place where that there is that opportunity to really put a great product in and get that return on investment. I think it's Kingston's, I sort of keep coming back to it, but it's a really interesting example because it's one where I think people, investors sort of stop looking at it because of the oversupply there. And you sort of see that these things probably come in cycles. From getting land and getting planning permission to building a building, you're probably looking at a 3 or 4 year span anyway. Then the sort of building, going up and going through its mobilization phase and filling up. Then those markets sort of probably get forgotten about a bit. They sort of become bad markets, and then it will take 3 or 4 years. With Kingston's example, if people are sort of savvy enough to look at that market again, it's now going to take sort of 3 or 4 years for people to get land, get planning, and get new kit built on that. So, the smart investors will be looking at probably going back and looking at some of the old markets that sort of starting to perform well, but it's about where's that market going to be in 4 years' time? Where's it going to be in 5 years' time? By the time I get my new building built on it, really.
That makes sense. And I guess, um, so as you were saying earlier about how, the Building Safety Act is leading investors to having to redistribute capital into upgrading their existing stock, which is affecting the pipeline. On the flip side of that, I guess, is affordability in rents. I've read this week, about the controversy around the Manchester student rent strike.
Yeah.
And you know, I've previously worked for providers. The same, everybody wants to provide good quality buildings that are safe, but as we
Yeah.
know, with the cost of energy and materials, these buildings are becoming more expensive to maintain, to build and maintain. How do we balance that against affordability? And is that a provider's problem to solve, or is it sort of more around government? Where do you see the sort of or is it more of a joined up approach to sort of tackling that affordability problem for students and accommodation?
Yeah. So I think first of all, I think purpose-built student accommodation, provides a really good solution for students that generally is fairly affordable when you look at inclusive bills. That there's sort of no hidden costs, and I think that sometimes PBSA gets beaten with a bit of a stick that it doesn't deserve to. That this industry um, takes students, gives them somewhere, as you said, safe to live, comfortable, the secure, all-inclusive rents, and it also is putting housing stock back into the open market, which is desperately needed at the moment. I think there's a really good range of student accommodation options in most markets. You'll have some properties that sort of the base level of pricing in the market, will be affordable on a student loan, and right up to like all singing, all dancing studios that probably are aimed at your sort of international students on sort of a significant they might be on sort of a government grant or sort of being funded through parents or things like that. So I think that there's a really good range, and I think that we provide a really good solution for students. That said, you do make a valid point that everything is being stretched for everyone at the moment, and we also need to balance the point of providing an affordable, safe product to students with returning investment for the people that are putting the money in. I think that it's sometimes forgotten that a lot of the money that's put into the sector to build these buildings, these buildings aren't cheap to build. You're looking, 50, 60, 70, 80 million pounds to build some of these buildings. And that money is coming from pension funds and things like that, which is then providing income to it is providing income for people in the future. So you might have a council pension fund that owns a building, and that's providing income for the people that have worked in the council for years. So it's really important that we get that balance and that investment keeps coming in. I think that is sometimes forgotten when people see sort of a headline rate of they might say, oh, £250 a week, how is that affordable? But we're providing a product for people, and it has to also there has to be a return for investors. Otherwise, there's no point in that product wouldn't exist. I do think that the government and local authorities need to work more closely with providers. At the moment, that there's work done with the British Property Federation. I work for Fresh, and we our sort of MD and CEO sit on the board of the British Property Federation, and we sort of have those conversations with sort of government agencies. in London, we work with the GLA on sort of affordability scales, and that there is a lot of pushback from parts of sort of London boroughs and the GLA on making accommodation more affordable, especially around sort of percentage of what percent of sort of maintenance loan dictates affordability. So there is that pushback, and I think that a lot of the time, or maybe not a lot of the time, but sometimes we're sort of seen by local authorities and the government as cash cows, and that it's about that they obviously want to get the best deal for students. We want the best for students as well. So everyone wants the same thing. It's just there's sometimes challenges on what the best thing for one person is not the best thing for other people. But yeah, to answer your question, I do think that there needs to be there needs to be more work done, and we need to work closer with the PBSA sector needs to work more closely with the HE sector, and we both need to work more closely with the government and have a joined up solution.
Do you think I mean, thinking about how the market governs itself, I think there's a lack of understanding at government level around the PBSA market, and therefore we as an industry, I say we as an industry rely on sort of Unipol, UUK,
Yeah.
to sort of bring that together. Do you think that's perhaps a symptom of us having separate governing bodies, and how do we engage all of those parties? Do Unipol have a role to play in that? Is there other than British Property Federation as well? Like, how do we bring those parties together, not just on a local basis? I read in the last couple of weeks about Nottingham's joined up strategy around student housing. So they brought together both universities, they brought together the council, the police, everything else. And I've got my own thoughts on the output of that strategy, but how are we going to get that done on a national level? Whereas at the moment it seems to be, providers are off doing their own thing, which is right, because there's a lack of regulation or a lack of support on a national level for the industry.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that Unipol and AMAG do a good job with the guidelines they put into place. We certainly seen, although it's voluntary and there is a lack of regulation, we've seen a lot of change come into student accommodation over the last 10 years because of Unipol's guidance. So things like the inquiry to late deliveries has really changed the way that the industry reacts to late deliveries and what the students get back from a late delivery. Certainly that the work that Unipol have done mean that students they're looked after a lot more when there's a late delivery. They're financially compensated, they can leave their leases. And ANAC have done a lot of work around sort of disability allowances for students as well. So you'll know that we're not allowed to in the industry, if you're signed up to Unipol, if somebody has a sort of disability and they use an accessible room, we only charge the sort of the base rate for that room in the building. So there has been a lot of positive change that's come from that regulation. However, as you said, that regulation is only voluntary. You don't have to be a member of ANAC or Unipol or UK. And perhaps the answer is to have compulsory regulation for the industry, that that providers, if they want to provide an accommodation service for a university, they must be registered with one of those branches. Certainly, in the old days, HMO providers used to have to be registered with the university, and somebody from the university would come around and check the houses individually. And if they didn't pass, they weren't allowed to market to those university students. I'm not saying that that's the way we should be going, and it definitely requires a bit more thought. But I'd like to think that, on a whole, that the providers that are part of Unipol and places like that, are doing a good job, and they are upholding those standards. But yeah, it's a fragmented market, isn't it? And we all work with universities with noms, and they might we have sort of annex standards in our properties, but they might be with the UK, so it's a different set of regulations. I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I think that when you look at the way that things are going in Wales and Scotland. In Scotland, you have to have compulsory. There's compulsory training now to be able to let rooms, and so it's sort of same in Wales. I think that we are going to see that in England in the next couple of years. Whether as providers we like it or not, that there's going to be more regulation. So I think we as an industry just need to make sure that we're sort of lobbying the right people to sort of shape that legislation and to shape what it looks like when it does come into force.
And touching on what you said about working in London, working in the GLA, how do you see the London market playing out over the next couple of years? We've seen, talking to one university in the last few months around, they've started to explore the possibility of releasing some of their assets to PBSA providers because they want to focus more on teaching and research rather than, they actually think that PBSA providers can do probably a better job of it in certain circumstances. So in terms of, we know that the increasing the supply of accommodation in London is going to be tough for a number of reasons: availability of land, regulation, politics. How do you see, what is our greatest market in the UK? How do you see that playing out over the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, that again, really good question there. I mean, one, there's just not going to be enough beds in the market for the growth of the market in the next sort of 3, 5, 10 years, and because of the short-termism that sort of existed with current planning policy, certainly in the short term, we're not going to be able to satisfy the demand. So we've got challenges there. I think to your point about the universities, yes, I've sort of heard that some universities do want to sort of move away from managing their sort of PBSA stock and leave that to private providers. But I think for a lot of the bigger providers, that it's so the living experience so sort of intrinsically linked to the sort of the study experience as well, that they want to keep doing it themselves. We work with some big private, we work with some big HE providers in London, and they have their own residence managers in place, and that they do a good job of, that they have really good student experience programs. Their sort of individual student experience programs are really at the accommodation level, are at the heart of what they do, and that they rely on that to bring students in, to the universities. If you've got a university where people are really happy living there, you can sell that to students. It's like, come live here, we'll give you a great course, but also we'll give you a great living experience. So I do think that universities, in London, are going to continue to, want to have their own people in place and manage their own properties. That said, that there is only a certain amount of space for that as well. Especially some of the smaller universities who are newer to the market, they're going to need our experience in PBSA to be able to provide the bed numbers, sort of for the future cohorts coming in. What's an interesting point is, around sort of planning and the London plan, where, to get planning permission on the building now in London, you need a certain, a certain percentage of the building needs to be a fit affordability criteria, or B, you need to have a nominations with the university. So I think that, and as part of that, the GLA insists that you speak to the most local universities first, rather than sort of just going out to the universities and you have contacts with. So I do think that as part of that London plan, that there's going to be more buildings more PBSA buildings sort of coming up in conjunction with universities. There's going to be sort of more of that co-managing element where you perhaps have, your PBSA, you have your management team in the property looking after it. You might look after the sort of the facilities, the building, how everything works inside, sort of the utilities, everything like that. And then you have the university team working in conjunction with you on student experience, sort of delivering, their sort of really tailored product to their own students. So I think it's going to be a bit of an amalgamation over the next few years of different models, but I sort of certainly see probably a bit of a growth in that hybrid model where PBSAs and universities are working together to deliver one, a great product that's safe, secure, has, sort of everything the students need is in a good location. That the private providers often have the funds to forward fund those buildings and build them. And then you've got the universities that have really clear ideas about what they want for the student experience, and they'll be working. They'll have their own people working with us in conjunction to deliver that student experience. I think that with the London plan as it is, I think we're going to certainly see more of that.
Moving on to the hot topic at the moment, particularly for investors around ESG.
Yeah.
So, how are you guys at Fresh sort of approaching this, both from an investor point of view, meeting their requirements, but also from a customer point of view? Because, take a market like London, for example, there could be 4 or 5 different universities students in that one building. Therefore, taking the taking the environmental approach around travel to locations, and also the different demographics of students that we've got, trying to educate our residents on how to live more sustainably. So, how are you going to sort of tackle? I'm particularly interested in the piece around educating and helping our residents to be more sustainable once they're in our communities. How are you?
Yeah. So probably sort of 2 parts of that, and I'd sort of probably focus a bit more on the second part. But the first part around the investors is that I think that over the next sort of 3, 5, 10 years, we're going to see a lot of money, a lot of capital expenditure spent on improving building efficiency. So, we're working with some of our investors at the moment. We've done, sort of really intrusive building surveys, looking at how we can improve metering in the building, replacing boilers with sort of heat pumps and things like that, and looking at sort of long-term savings. So, big capital spend, but, good return on investment over the next 10 years. We've probably seen a bit of that in the past with the, small things like changes from light, halogen light bulbs to, LEDs and stuff. But I think investors are sort of really focused now on how they can deliver, sort of savings. And I think that people, especially with this sort of energy price rises, are not scared now to put the capital in to, change boilers and put solar panels on and things like that. I mean, the student side is definitely the more interesting side, because there's loads of things that we can do, and there's loads of things we're doing as well. And I think with sort of the social governance side, it's all about sort of marginal gains, incremental gains. If you can make a small change and make lots of small changes, then you're going to make a big change in the end. We're looking at the most basic stuff. So from your welcome packs, is everything in your welcome packs sustainable? So we've done stuff like bamboo toothbrushes, and this year Fresh gave every resident a pair of Fresh socks, which are pretty cool. They're sort of branded, but they're made from sustainable sources. So it's sort of educating students on what is and what isn't sustainable. We're working with Fresh have just started working with a charity called Reuse, and probably had lots of sort of ad hoc programs in the past before. You see, British Heart Foundation boxes in accommodations at the end of the year, and charities will come and pick stuff up. When I worked at IQ, we used St Vincent de Paul's in London, but I think that there's been much more focus now on institutional change, where you have a partner for the whole company. So we're using sort of a charity that sort of aligned to all of the fresh properties, and that they'll come around and pick stuff up, and it's not just the normal stuff that the charities want to pick up, but they'll come and pick stuff up to re sort of stuff like you see on the repair shop. They'll be like repairing stuff and giving it to different charities and stuff like that. We're having electric charger points put in some of the properties. In London, we're working with one of the HE providers to put electric charger points in for scooters, like the e-scooters you get, which is is pretty cool. Right down to the really simple stuff you can do. Like the stuff that sort of everyone really does. Sort of programs on turning your lights off, turning your heating off. Making sure that people know when they go out their rooms that it's best to turn stuff off. So there's tons of stuff going on, and I think that with ESG being such a hot topic at the moment, that's only going to grow. And I think we work in the third party space, and I think primarily people would have come to you to run their buildings a few years ago, and you'd be talking to them about the NOI growth you could deliver, and your safety and things like that. And now you're talking to clients about, you're talking to investors about their ESG programs, what they want to provide to their investors, and how you can work with them to provide that. So I think it's only going to be a space that grows, and we certainly seen some really good stuff. I mean, for one example that I pull off is we've got a property in Brighton, and we worked with the local charity shop just on the same road from us, and we got them to donate loads of clothes, basically like plain clothes. And the residents here, I mean, I'm here today, which is why I say here, but the residents, we provided like the stuff to decorate the clothes and to sort of jazz them up a bit. And then we gave them back to the shop, and they did a pop-up shop on London Road in Brighton with all the stuff that the students had decorated and generated. I think it was a couple of £100 of income for the charity shops, and just small things like that, which is one, it's great for your social program, it's great for your social media as well. You get those images up, it sells your property to people coming in, but also it really satisfies investors' ESG programs as well, and what they want to do, and what the output that they want. So there's tons of stuff that I think we're going to see in the future.
I really like the idea of the fresh socks,
Yeah.
particularly being sustainable. I think it's nice to see somebody doing something different. Slight pivot now away from PBSA, even though I could talk to you about PBSA all afternoon, I think. So talking more about culture and change in you, and if you had to say what your values were, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, actually. I would probably say, well, I'm a bit of a stoic. I'm really interested in stoicism and that sort of branch of philosophy, mainly from I think I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius at university, and it sort of had sort of quite a profound impact on me. So the four pillars of stoicism are wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation or temperance. So I'd like to think that when I make decisions, that's sort of how I'm making decisions, and the way a lot of people model themselves on their values, and you might not know you're doing it, but that's sort of the way it is, I think. So yeah, really interested in stoicism. I think that there's so much negativity in the world, and I think that when you look at what you can affect and how you can affect it, then you can probably pull away a lot of negativity. and you can then focus on how you can, like, one, better yourself, and how get positive, you know, how you can get positive outcomes. Certainly, you know, conversations I have with my team, you know, when people, you know, naturally people get overwhelmed with things or worry about things, it's always sort of think, well, what can you affect? Like, if you take a step back, look at a problem and look at how you can affect it and what parts of it you can affect, and you just do your best with that. And then I think as long as you've done that, and as long as you've, like, literally done the best you can on that, then you know, then that's a good position to be in, and you can look at that problem then. You might not have got the outcome you wanted, but if you've done everything that you could, you can then be positive about it. So that's certainly, I would say that's how I sort of base. But they're my values really, and that's sort of how I base sort of attacking problems with those values.
And does that, it sounds like you're quite self-reflective when it comes to the journey that you've been on, particularly as we talked about, at the beginning, from becoming a chef and then changing and going to university and then ended up in student accommodation. So, I was listening to somebody recently that talked about trying to talk to your future self and trying to because we all use hindsight to look back and think, oh, I would have done that differently or anything else. But like, can you what path do you think you're on? For not just career wise, but in general. How would you sort of summarize the path you're on, and what do you see coming in the future?
Well, I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I think it's a good question. Something you said earlier, when people talk about where they've got to, a lot of people sort of fall into roles. So I'd like to think I'm on a path where I'm sort of looking forward and hopefully choosing, where I'm going to go to. Um, you know, um, yeah, we might need to do some editing here, Gareth.
Don't worry, don't
Sounds
worry.
stumbling.
That was a bit of a curveball question.
No, it's fine. But yeah, I guess, like, if I was to, look at my future self, wow, that's a yeah. I'm just not sure I think like that. I think if I was to look at my future self, I'd be asking them what they thought of me back, like, now.
That makes sense. Okay, so leads me on to what we always finish with: quick fire round. So,
Cool.
if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
I would definitely try and get people to be a bit more savvy about sort of social media and opinions, and things like that. I'm a great believer in the marketplace of ideas, and when I was younger, I wrote a few sort of blogs on it and things like that. But I think that the marketplace of ideas, that the whole idea of that has been corrupted, and that social media is great and it's brilliant for opinions, staying hot on issues, and being in contact with your old friends and things like that. But I think it's used so irresponsibly sometimes. When we look at, it doesn't matter what your politics are, but you look at how you look at places like America with Donald Trump coming into power. I just look and think, oh my, how does that even happen? I made the decision a couple of years ago, sort of during Brexit, actually. It's fine to have whatever opinion you want on Brexit, but it's just so much negativity, and I just read stuff on social media and just think, oh my God, guys, like, how do you come up with this opinion? Like, people just see stuff on social media and they just think it's gospel. It's all about critical thinking, and I think the power of social media is eroding people's ability to think critically about big issues. And I would like there to be a bit more understanding of that, and regulation, if there is such a regulation. And I think that there would then be a lot less negativity in the world, and people would look at things with a bit more of a positive outlook, because human beings naturally I think that human beings tend to look at things with a lot of people look at things with a sort of half glass empty attitude. And if there's lots of negative stuff on social media, and that's what you're seeing all day on your phone and your computer, then people end up thinking more with that half glass empty attitude. And I think as human beings, we work hard, and there's no point in working hard unless you're going to sort of enjoy your life and do positive things. And I think if you're looking at sort of all that negativity all the time, then how are you positive, and how do you live with that positive mindset? So lots of it's a really interesting topic, actually.
Okay. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to change their direction but doesn't know where to start?
I would say write everything down, the pros and the cons of what you want to do and why, and then just look at the pros. Because if you're going to look at the cons, then you're never going to make that change. And change is like scary, isn't it? Everything. It doesn't have to be your work. If you're thinking about moving house or moving to a new town, or sort of personal change. Do you want kids or not, or are you going to get married? But the one we always talk about is work, and everything sort of seems to come back to that, because you spend so much time doing it, I guess. But if you look at the negatives all the time, and what could happen, and how things could go wrong, then you're never going to make that change, and you're probably going to be stuck doing something that you don't want to do, and you might end up being sort of bitter and resent that. And I'd say read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and look at what you can affect and how you can affect it, and don't be scared to make that jump.
Okay, so last one in the quick fire round. What is going to be your next big change?
So by the time this podcast goes out, if it goes out, I'm sort of being promoted fresh. So I'm taking on the role of head of divisional operations from April the 1st. So I think that is going to be, it's going to be different for me. I've always worked in not always worked in central operations, but I've worked in central operations now for sort of quite a few years, and it's going to be a change in that I'll be a little bit removed from the day to day, and the day to day is something that I love. I love working with my teams and my people, and all your best results come from like having good people and molding them and working with them. So be a bit more of a move to a bit more of a strategic role. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to take up a lot of my time over the next year or two. So yeah, I mean that's one where I've just got a clear answer, just because of work circumstances at the moment.
Right, and last question: who would you recommend to be my next guest on Know Your Shift?
Oh, it's a good question. Something that's I've been thinking about. I think a good guest would be a guy that I used to work with, who's got a really interesting outlook on life. This guy called Stephen Finch, and it's lots of different sort of careers and backgrounds, but really hot on some interesting topics as well. So stuff building safety and things like that. It's got some really interesting takes on that. So he'd be good. If you wanted to look at talking to someone from an HE background, I know everyone in student accommodation knows Nigel Lindo at UEA. UAL. Top guy, really interesting takes on the HE market. If you wanted to look at someone who didn't work in property at all, got a good friend called Chris Wall. He works in sort of technology, and he sort of works with sort of government agencies on changing the technology that they're using, and sort of guiding people through those processes. So got a few people you could reach out to.
Yeah, thanks. We'll definitely tag them in the post and see if we can get them on future episodes. Eddie, thanks for talking to me on Know Your Shift. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. I think, alongside Fatty recommending you to come on the podcast, you were someone I wanted to talk to because your passion for the sector really comes across. And someone that's involved in the detail and is really knowledgeable both about the HE sector and also PBSA. And we managed to talk a little bit about hospitality. Perhaps we could do another one. I could talk about that for a long time as well. And we managed to squeeze in some stoicism as well. So thanks for joining me on the podcast. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Gareth. It's great to be on.